Greetings and hello to everyone. This is the Business of Betting podcast, and I'm your host, Jake Williams. Today is episode 10, and I'm very excited to chat with our first guest out of Las Vegas, Nevada, Chris Connelly. Chris is the founder of Contrarian Investments, LLC, a Nevada-registered sports betting entity. Chris takes us inside Las Vegas and the life of a sports betting entity. He speaks about his staking plan, betting at the window, line moves, American sports, and what it is like to be one of a very small group to operate a betting entity. As always, you can find us at businessofbetting.com or at bettingpod on Twitter. Please fire in any questions or feedback or potential guests you would like to hear from. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy my chat with Chris Connelly. Chris, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jake. Pleasure.
So, Chris, why don't you get us started by giving the listeners some background about you and what led you to start a betting entity in Las Vegas?
Sure. Yeah. So, I have plenty of experience in the field, despite only being 31 years old. Kind of unique. I grew up. My grandfather he's a successful businessman, but, a punter, as they call it in Australia, as far as wagering. So in the United States, it'd be equivalent to a square or just a public bettor. He didn't fare too well, but he did teach me the basics of sports betting and spreads in particular. And so, yeah, I could remember at an early age, even being in elementary school, and some of my classmates would say, in 5th and 6th grade, some of my classmates would say, wow, do you see, Michael Jordan last night for the Bulls scored 40 points. And I'd say, yeah, but the Bulls, they didn't cover the spread. And they'd say, what are you talking about? What's the spread? And I already had grasped the concept and kind of understood what spreads were at a very early age. Which is both good and bad. I mean, when you're young and you're watching a game and you don't even factor in, who wins, per se, it's more of who's covering. You're just looking at point spreads. It kind of takes a little bit out of the game, and the enjoyment out of the game. When you're a kid and you can't really be betting on your own. But I took that understanding and, myself, I was betting at an early age. In college, did fairly poorly, like most, people do. But luckily I was young and was betting smaller amounts at that time. So I learned some tough lessons at an early age. And it really helped propel me down the road. So I took some losses in college. I was betting on the side and going to school, getting a degree in business, and read some books, most notably Michael Kinn's Computer Group, and from there used my friend's expertise, who was a computer programmer, getting his master's in computer engineering, and he went on to work at Qualcomm and has since started his own business. Very intelligent guy. He helped write a computer program using some inputs that I deemed very valuable in sports betting. So from then, after graduating, I got some regular jobs. I worked at a law firm doing finance, and then also worked as a project estimator for commercial construction projects. And the whole time I was wagering on the side in Southern California illegally, using, bookies and such, and doing really well. But I built up, saved money, and did well on sports betting, and decided to move out to Las Vegas after 4 years after graduating from college. And have been doing very well sports betting. um, from then on, and was noticed by a bigger syndicate betting group out in Vegas, who I consulted for a few years before starting my fund. So even before the Senate bill of Senate Bill 443 passed, allowing the creation of sports betting funds, I had already contacted the SEC and was already kind of in my own process of registering a sports betting fund. But since the law was, on the table and into effect, I kind of pulled back on that and joined and contacted Quentin Singleton, who's pretty much the architect of the law on this. And yeah, once the bill passed, filed all my paperwork and began the process of starting my sports betting fund. So even before the fund started, I've been out here in Vegas betting professionally as my main source of income for 4 years prior to even starting the fund. So yeah, that's my brief history.
So what was it like growing up in the United States with, I guess, the current situation as it is with, Vegas being the epicenter of the gambling in the US and essentially being illegal other than some small pockets where there's, I think, 3 states where you can have sort of modified gambling, nothing like Vegas. Where did you get all the information from other than, family and friends? Was it something that was at all mainstream, or was it just small pockets within the schools or universities where you could talk to people about the spreads and get some further info and have those in-depth discussions?
Yeah, so the information's out there. Despite it being illegal, it's quote unquote illegal, it's very widespread. Gambling's widespread throughout the United States. I think in Nevada, they do $5 billion in handle a year, and offshore, American money that's wagered offshore is estimated at the numbers as high as 200, right around $200 billion, right? So Vegas, despite Nevada, despite being the kind of the hub, it only is a small fraction, holds a small fraction of the overall gambling holdings, for the majority of the country. So it's very widespread. The information is definitely out there. Everyone's aware of the point spread. Even in San Diego, the newspaper, despite it being illegal in San Diego, it would list the spreads of the games every day. And that's when I was young, when I was in elementary school, that's where I got my spreads from the daily newspaper, despite it being illegal in the area that I was at. So yeah.
Did you ever think of getting involved in some mathematics or computer programming or other things to facilitate your, I guess, future in the betting, or were you just focused on getting through university and the betting was a hobby and a side project until ultimately it became something you could make a living from professionally?
Yeah, so I was just in college. I was just an average bettor. I wasn't sophisticated. I didn't have computer programs. I fell into a trap of a lot of common bettors. Money management wasn't very strong. I was betting with emotion. I wasn't able to quantify my sides. So these were all things, that the majority of the public, this is how they bet. And so I quickly realized, though, I wouldn't be successful like this. So I have a business degree. I went to school for business. I did an internship at Morgan Stanley. I was really interested in investing. That was my what I thought was going to be my profession. But I graduated during the financial crash here in the United States. My connection at Morgan Stanley that I was going to work for, he ended up getting laid off himself, so I didn't have an in there. So so I went to work in just traditional fields, like I mentioned. I worked at a law firm doing finance, and then commercial projects as an estimator. But I use the services, like I mentioned, of my friend who's a highly skilled computer engineer. and like I mentioned, went on to work at Qualcomm, very high up over there. So he would be able to, do far more than I'd ever be able to accomplish in the field, putting together my own program. So he was able to do it for me, but with the inputs that I requested.
Yep.
So yeah.
So are you a one-man solo mission? Obviously, you would have people helping you with different aspects, but from making a living professionally, is it just you running the operation?
Yeah, so as far as for the fund, it's me. Yes, I handle the majority of everything. I do have a designated person, an employee in Vegas full-time that could also put in wagers on my behalf in case for whatever reason I, have to take off or am at a, casino or something where I can't, access the app. He could put in the plays. We also have the services of a solid accounting firm here in Vegas and also legal counsel. And then we just took on our first group of interns this summer, and they're a highly skilled group that are, going to school Harvard, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Northeastern University. So, and they all have economics, finance degrees, and are on board. So that's the team. And then obviously one of the main components is obviously my friend that's a computer engineer. We revisit the computer program every off season to make adjustments. And one quick example was the other year, college basketball shot clock was reduced from 34 seconds to 30 seconds. We did not take that into account during the season, and our numbers were just slightly off the whole season. Statistically, the teams that were better were, have the ball a little more during the game, have a few more possessions, and the weaker teams have the ball a few more possessions. So the stronger teams were kind of outperforming their metrics nightly, and that led us to take some losses that year in college basketball. So that off season, we were able to adjust our numbers and our program and fine tune it for the following season. So we do make some slight adjustments in the off season, but the core fundamentals of the computer program are intact and stay intact season to season.
So what are some of the things that you needed to do to transition from a casual to a professional? Obviously, there's the time element, but are there any specific things that you did to become a professional? Because obviously there's going to be casual or recreational bettors and punters out there who are listening who maybe they want to be professional one day, maybe they just want to be a better casual bettor. So do you have any tips or some of the things you did other than devoting time and discipline to your, I guess, entity? Yeah,
definitely. So yeah, just to be clear, when I was, a punter, I was young. I was in college and I was betting, $100, maybe $200 on a game, right? Small amounts. And, I was losing like a lot of people would lose. And so I went back to the drawing board, and, figured out some things based off doing some reading. So I did some research on people that were successful in the industry, and I mentioned Michael Kinsa Computer Group. So that's, based on that book, pretty much I came up with the solution. I needed to be able to quantify my sides, because it was the sides where I felt, man, this is a great play. I know this side is going to win, and I would risk maybe more money. It would lose the majority of the time, right? So, and I went back to the drawing board. I have to be able to quantify the sides. And to do that, you have to be able to have numbers backing it. So to do that, I kind of read up on some of the people that were successful in the industry. And so implemented some of the strategies. And just a brief synopsis of my strategy. It's, we run a simulation of the two teams that are playing in a match, and we have an estimated point spread. And that's no different than what traditional, bettors do. A lot of bettors have the same software. The sports books have the same software. That's not really an edge, but we have other key factors One being, referees play a role in NBA and college basketball games. So certain refs are worth, maybe a point to a point and a half to the final spread. Also, we look for arbitrage. So when lines are inflated based on public perception on a game, we're able to identify those sides and buy back on the opposite sides. Transitioning from a casual to a professional bettor, one of the main things is you have to be able to quantify your side. So you take the emotion, you take the, your personal opinions out of the mix completely. Also money management, able to identify, what your risk should be. And I identified mine using the Kelly Criterion model. We use a half model of the Kelly Criterion. So based on, a sample of historic results using that win percentage versus estimated number of plays in the season, we have a risk percentage of the bankroll that we flat bet on each play. So, and that's what I have done since I started becoming successful at this. So those are the things that anyone could do. Anyone could be a smart money manager, and obviously being able to stick to your numbers, taking the emotion out of it. Because I could tell you right now, even with the fun, even being successful, very successful the past 5 years at this, there's games where I look at and I say, and I'm looking at the numbers and I'm saying, wow, I really don't want to be on the side. I really don't, this is a tough play to make, but you just trust your numbers and you go with it. And over the long run, it works out. So
how long did it take for you to get to or land on the half Kelly strategy that you do use? Because I've spoken to some professionals who use straight Kelly, some use modified Kelly, some have two bankrolls that they use, and they have modified strategies for either bankroll, which includes some portion of Kelly. Was it a long, drawn-out process, and did you need to learn from trial and error, or did you just do a lot of research in the beginning and land on your half Kelly strategy?
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I did a ton of research from the beginning, and I landed on a strategy and used 5.5%, which seems rather high, but I am very selective with my wagers. That's another focal point of my wagering strategy. A lot of professionals, they have a slight advantage on a bunch of plays, and they're firing away on each play and risking 1 to 2% is common. And what I'm doing is I'm not looking for slight advantages. I'm looking for pretty sizable advantages, and I'm patient, wait for those spots, and then I'm hitting those spots with more risk. I came up with the 5.5% from the very beginning and utilized that. And then every off season, I readjust my bankroll, and now I'm taking a new 5.5% off the adjusted bankroll going into the following season. So that's been my strategy from day one of coming out to Vegas.
And is that for every single bet across every single sport and bet type, or do you split that up per sport or per under overs versus money line and things like that, or the spread?
Yeah, and that's another thing. It's a little tough to get down 5.5% on, say, a college basketball game, right? Or especially an over-under. And I don't do a lot of over-unders. There's a few that meet my criteria and are plays, but mostly it's strictly sides and point spreads, no money lines. So yeah, it's sometimes we're not able to get down the full 5.5%, but the goal is to always get down 5.5%. And there are certain plays, certain sides where the numbers they match up. They just match up really nice. Everything sets up perfectly. And so on those, personally, I would put maybe a little more on those games, not overextending myself, but a little more. The fund, we never risk more than 5.5% per game. So yeah, but yeah, we stick to 5.5% unless we can't. Like I mentioned, there's some games where you could only maybe get down 2% on a game, and that's just the best we could do without taking a worse number. And that's another thing maybe we'll get into in a little bit is, pricing the market. I've priced the market here in Vegas for a little while now. And I mean, I'm moving lines with my wagers. So the rest of the betting public is betting off of the lines that I move essentially. So the books, they're keen on this, and so when I hit a game, they're moving the lines a little quicker, and so I'm not able to get down the full 5.5% personally around town like I used to when I first came here.
So what's your approach then to the bookmakers? Because as a registered betting entity in Las Vegas, that implies that you're implying that you're going to win long term, you're going to invest rather than gamble. So what is the advantage for those bookmakers to take your action if they know that they're going to lose money to you over time? It seems like a juxtaposition for them to say, yeah, we're going to accept bets from the smartest entities out there, and then also know that they're going to lose over time. Obviously, there's the value in the information that you're providing based on your bets, but is there any other way or any other regulations so that you can have a relationship with bookmakers to be able to get the volume down you want, or are you just at the mercy of the individual bookmaker?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's what I get a lot of that from sophisticated bettors. That's one of the main questions that they ask. So yeah, so I do have limits in place. So currently I'm partnered with CG Technologies, who operates 8 sports books here in Vegas. They are and that's formerly Cantor Fitzgerald. It's backed by a financial institution, but they pride themselves on being a sharp, quote unquote, sharper book. So we're going up against quote unquote sharper lines compared to the rest of the industry here in Vegas, but they do accept higher limits on their bets. So it's a little give and take. I do have betting limits in place. I can't just go in and say, yeah, I'm going to make $1 million wager on this game. I do have an agreement with them where they will never reduce my limit. It could only go up, but at the same time, I do have those certain limits in place that I have to stick to. So one of the benefits for them is, especially with my betting philosophy, I mean, first let's say the majority of bettors, they don't win, right? They're going to lose. My understanding is while there are going to be some sophisticated funds, like I mentioned, I consult for a syndicate group out here. They're very hesitant to be involved in this whatsoever because they don't want to provide their name, their information to the bookmakers. It makes it easier for them to be tracked. They don't want any part of that. So a lot of the quote unquote syndicates, sharp bettors, they're not going to register. They are going to get some, people in this space and I'm sure the bookmakers, figure the majority of the people that come on will lose over time, especially against sharper lines. So, as I mentioned, I do have limits in place, and I'm regulated to those limits. But what it does provide for the bookmaker is, obviously I help set their lines for them and create sharper lines. I've moved their lines on a $2,000 bet, so they see me hit a side and they adjust their line, and the rest of the market here in Vegas does usually follow CG Technology because they are one of the more sophisticated book operators. In addition to that, one of the other advantages for the bookmaker, especially with my company, my betting philosophy, is I align myself on the opposite of the public and the majority of the money coming in. So if they're taking a lot of action and they are moving a line, in one direction, I'm usually on the opposite side. So for them, it's just helping balance their books in the end, so they're able to collect their vig. So while I'm getting a better line and helping shape their line, I'm also, in a sense, potentially, and in most situations, evening out their action and their liability.
So let's talk about that for a second, your bet-by-bet strategy. Are you looking to play both sides of a game necessarily because you know or you think you know that the line will move, or are you waiting for in-game opportunities? Are you looking to hedge your bets in many cases, or what percentage would you be looking to hedge?
No, definitely not. I don't hedge pretty much whatsoever. The in-game limits are very tight. In the United States, we haven't adapted to the rest of the world, Europe, and Australia yet. So our in-game opportunity is very minimal. The lines are there, but the limits are just way too tight for it to be worth anything. So no, I'm not looking to hedge. We're looking for the right side at the right number. So we have a number in mind and we have a side in mind that, once we get to that point, we're firing on a game. And once the line moves out of our range, from that point on, we're passing. So while there is opportunities to hedge and bet both sides of a game, we're confident not only in just the number but also the side that we're on. So yeah, we take our advantage and let it play out for itself. A perfect example would be this past NFL season, and if you know about NFL football, this was a Monday night contest. These are heavily bet games. We hit the New York Jets at plus 2 points, and the syndicate I consulted for, they also hit it slightly after us. We moved the line to 1.5. It got moved to 1. Various talking heads went on different shows claiming, sharp money's on the Jets. Public kind of flip-flopped and jumped on our side, and the number closed at the Jets favored by 2 points. So that's a 4-point swing off of no injuries on a Monday night football contest where we had the best number. And yeah, so we beat an NFL spread by 4 points and essentially moved the whole market in the process. So that's just, we could have gone back and bought off on the other side, but we were confident on that side at that number, and yeah, and so yeah, we ride it out with the sides that we're confident in.
Are you looking to develop your betting strategy at all to include some form of hedging once there is more opportunities and in-game betting in Las Vegas develops a bit more? Because obviously 4-point swings are valuable, especially when you're talking around the number 3 and around the number 7, less so than Pick'em or other higher numbers, for example. But are you looking to, I guess, maximize your betting options and how you approach game-by-game betting, especially with NFL where the volume is so high?
Definitely. So in-game betting provides the most opportunity to be profitable, in my opinion. Personally, I've had accounts that have allowed in-game betting, and like I mentioned, the limits are tight, but I kill those and get shut down on those accounts. It's in-game betting provides a very solid opportunity. It's just about limits at this point, and right now there's just no opportunities with the current limits in place in Las Vegas. I know, like I mentioned, Europe, they have some opportunities in-game betting, obviously you guys as well in Australia, but we're just not there yet. So yeah, when the opportunity does present itself, that's something we'll definitely be involved in. And long-term strategy is we look to move outside the United States. So even particularly maybe partner up with Pinnacle or some of the bookmakers in Southeast Asia. So that's a little down the road. But right now we're just trying to grow the fund organically, show that we could beat the odds makers, beat the closing number, and produce profits for investors. And so that's our current goal. But to specifically answer your question, yes, in-game betting will provide the best opportunity for us going forward. But as far as hedging our bets before the game starts, that's not part of the betting philosophy, and I don't envision us ever taking that stance.
So take the listeners through some of the major advantages of having an entity regulated and set up, because obviously you could do this yourself, as you probably were doing to a large extent, without those investors pulling their money. Is that one of the major advantages and a big reason why you do it, having that regulated environment where investors can be comfortable, or are there other things that make it much more worthwhile to be registered?
Yeah, like I mentioned previously, I was into investing just in stocks before I've done sports betting. That was, I was investing in stocks when I was 13-year-old. I owned my first, stock shares of a stock, Sienna Corporation. So that was my passion. To be honest, I've been able to produce returns on sports betting that far exceed the traditional stock market. And not only just my own returns with the traditional stock market, but people that are invested in the stock market, that also have followed me, because before starting my fund, I posted all my plays on various forums, and I've gained somewhat of a following here in the United States based on my success. So people that were betting my plays, say they make more money doing that than they do in their retirement savings, or in what their fund manager is doing for them. So it just got me, thinking. Obviously, I read Mark Cuban's blog on sports betting, the advantages of that over traditional markets, and there are many, and yeah, so it just provides. I see this as being a huge industry. Like I mentioned, only $5 billion is wagered legally currently. Once sports betting becomes legal in the United States, there's another $200 billion that come offshore and are wagered here legally. So that just increases the liquidity in the market and makes things, better for all. And like I mentioned, the main goal is to produce returns for investors. So this allows, me to be tracked. I'm monitored by various agencies, the Bank of Nevada, where all funds are held for my company. It's monitored by them. I'm monitored by the Nevada Gaming Board. So I have eyes on my operations. I can't just claim, anything I want to claim. The money's tracked, and pretty much what I'm doing is just showcasing my ability right now until the market becomes a little more liquid, and the fund could really take on larger assets under management, and I could challenge traditional traditional investment options, traditional stocks, bonds, ETFs. I really do believe I could far outperform those with sports betting. I feel it's a great opportunity.
So take us into some of those numbers then, because I think people in the investing world, or those who are interested in that, would understand probably from a granular level what they get from their bank interest, which is almost zero, and then they've probably read what some of the maybe the Bernie Madoff investment numbers have been in the investing world. Obviously, the sports betting and the entity world is very different, and the returns, obviously they fall in line somewhat with that. But do you want to just take us through, since you've been tracking, how the numbers have played out and what your projections are looking like?
Yeah, definitely. So, historically, I've hit just over 55% on minus 110 odds. That's documented by a third party. And I've averaged, over just over 40% returns year over year prior to starting the fund. With the fund, year to date, we're up 12.6%. Overall, though, we are just up over just under 1% at 0.52%. We suffered some pretty heavy outflows in December and January, and that's documented in our prospectus. I'm upfront about all losses. I own all losses. I don't try to cover anything up, but to be honest, I would compare it to the recession in 2008 with sports betting. Like I mentioned, we align ourselves in line with the sports books on most plays, whereas the public is betting on one side, we're buying off on the other side against those inflated lines. And William Hill issued a profit warning to their shareholders in December, basing off punters having, an amazing run, essentially, for that month. And that's the same month we suffered our worst losses. Sportsbooks also came out and said January NFL was the worst ever. They suffered their biggest losses ever recorded on NFL games in the month of January. We were on those same NFL games, and we suffered losses along those lines as well, but still managed to overcome that. And like I mentioned, are currently year-to-date up 12.6%. So to put that in perspective, despite suffering, some major setbacks in the months of December and January, we were profitable in the months leading up to that, and since that. And the long term, there's no guarantees in investing, but the long term forecast is that it'll fall in line with historical averages, and will be along the lines of just over 40% returns year over year. That's our goal.
So take us through what it's like to speak to investors, because obviously in the US specifically, there's obviously different stigmas attached to gambling and in sports betting, given the regulatory and legislative environment. What do you have to do to not only convince, but sort of calm these people's nerves when it comes to investing in a registered and tracked sports betting entity?
True. So those are great points, and that's been my biggest obstacle. So I don't seek out investors. My initial investors were all people that followed me and my success before I started the fund. So all the people that got in initially, they already had seen, how well I'd done, and they wanted to be a part of it. So that was easy. They came to me. I've been in various publications, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Las Vegas Business Press, Inc., various others that have, documented my success and my fund, and so people have read that and they've reached out. But yeah, it's tough because there definitely in the United States there's a negative stigma on sports betting, when really people don't realize that the money that they're giving to their mutual fund manager, that guy's gambling with your money equally or more than we are. The difference, there's few differences, and I'll just touch on them briefly right here. Maybe we could get into, but some of the major differences between my fund and a traditional investment is we're not correlated to the market. So when the market tanks or interest rates rise, there's zero correlation. We're extremely diversified in that sense. So in another sense, we don't take a management fee. So I'm not getting paid if my investors don't get paid. Whereas a traditional fund, they're going to take they call it like a 220 or 330, where they're going to take 2% of your of the holding for themselves for operational costs, and then they're going to take 20% of profits, or 330. And I front all overhead. I'm that confident I'm able to produce returns for my investors that all overhead is fronted. I'm only taking a fee on the returns. So yeah, that's some of the differences. And then one of the other things that is really tough that I didn't anticipate was my investors. With my investment strategy, I mentioned we are going against inflated lines, and lines get inflated because people see, the NFL, the Patriots cover week after week. They're a dynasty. They're a great team. They win every week, and the books adjust. They inflate the lines, and the public still comes and they pound that side, and the line gets bet up even higher. And we have no choice. We have to go with our numbers. Our numbers indicate that they're the numbers highly inflated. We're going against the Patriots, and then all my investors are notified of these sides as soon as the game goes off, so they're able to watch it for themselves. And they'll say, what are we doing? Like, why are we going against the Patriots? Or why are we on the Browns? And there's a lot of, feedback from investors where they probably wouldn't question their financial advisor saying, we're going to invest in Apple, right? They're just go with the flow, despite Apple having a great, quarter, but still losing money because they didn't meet projections. A lot of investors do question the sides because we're not betting the sexiest sides, but in the long run, those are the sides that are the most profitable. And that I spend a lot of time trying to explain that to investors, and maybe too much time this past year, and this next year, we'll just let the numbers speak for themselves and try to do less explaining of the strategy.
It is certainly an interesting component, and I guess that insight is fascinating because it is a similar outcome when you're speaking purely numbers-wise, and that's certainly the goal. But when it comes to the passion and the subjective nature of people following their team, I guess they just can't help themselves, right?
Exactly, and I understand because I used to be like that. I used to look at games and say, "There's no way the Patriots, don't cover 6-point spread," but that line gets bet from 6 to 7 to 7.5. We have a clear advantage. We have to play the numbers, but it is hard to explain that to some people, especially when the game doesn't come through. Like I mentioned, December was a bad month. NFL in January did not go well, and the favorites won and covered. For example, in the Wall Street Journal, we were featured, and they mentioned, we're invested in the Falcons plus 3 points. They're up 28-3 late in the game, and they end up going to overtime and losing and not covering the spread. It's the right side the whole way, just the wrong result. But, people have a tough time when you're going against the most popular teams. But like I said, at the end of the day, the numbers prove our strategy is the right strategy and the right way to go. But some casual people that don't understand this market might disagree initially.
Yep. So I've always heard some crazy stories from Vegas in many respects, but one that I always found interesting was that only very recently has use of apps become widespread, and people would talk about going to the window as if that was the only way to get down a bet. But it seems like that was the only way to get down a bet. Obviously, growing up in Australia and being in different jurisdictions, I've seen the ways you can get bets down, and it sounds like Vegas has been pretty archaic in that sense. Do you want to just take us through, from your early experiences in Vegas to now, what's changed in the ability to get a bet down?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So when I first came out, too, one of the main things was, like I mentioned, I consulted for a syndicate, and one of the things they told me was stay away from the apps because for one, it allows the books to easily track your action, right? And so if you're a long-term winner, successful, they limit you or even cut you off. But anyways, when I first came out, the apps were not a thing. You have to go to the window and place your bets. And a funny thing is, a few of my potential investors or investors that they want to know, well, what happens if you're going to make a bet for the fund and you get robbed at the sports book, right? So everything that's done with the fund, it's all done electronically. It's all done through an app. The money never comes out of the bank whatsoever. So people do still have that kind of mentality that you have to go to the window to make a bet. But it's coming along slightly. Now, like I mentioned, we make our trades with the fund through apps. I still go to the window to make bets for myself, just because, like I mentioned, I try to stay under certain limits and keep my name off of anything that would register me as maybe a successful player or whatnot. So that's some of the things that I do. But it's still a work in progress. There's still some sports books that don't have apps available, and you do have to go to the window to make your bets and look at the board that they have up. to check your numbers. So it is kind of crazy. We're not that developed in that sense.
I think some people would be falling off their chair just listening to that. The looking up at the board and walking to a human being and actually having to speak to a human being would be something that was back in the 90s. But anyway.
And I'll tell you real quick, the worst part about that is especially busier weekends when maybe, you have 10,000, 20,000 in cash and you literally are looking at the board while some person in front of you is trying to put a parlay card down for, $10, $20. And you watch the number move as you're like the second person in line against you. You know what I mean? It's just
brutal.
It's just absolutely brutal. So yeah, we're still pretty archaic in that sense of having apps and technology here in Vegas.
So can you take us through, I guess, very briefly, or touch on some of the main things that you go through on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis? Are you watching all of the games? Are you tinkering with your computer systems and algorithms? Are you running around Vegas meeting people, meeting investors, talking to a lot of people, and the computer system does a lot of the work? Can you just touch on a few of the things that you're doing on a constant basis?
Yeah. So, before I started the fund, the main thing I was doing was, inputting the numbers for the computer program, monitoring the market, looking for the best opportunities, and placing my bets, and that was the extent of it. And I do spend a lot of time monitoring the market, seeing where the lines open. I know Sunday night, lines open for NFL. Not till Wednesday do they firm up where you could get down substantial amounts. Thursday you have the injury reports come out, so I know the days, the times, when, to hit certain games, when to wait. So that's stuff I just learned from being in the industry and just knowing, and experiencing it. But yeah, now with the fund, I spend a lot of time talking to potential investors, current investors. I spend a good deal amount of time. I provide all my investors with monthly statements, individual, and also electronic transcript of all wagers so they could, match it up for themselves. I have to do, a good amount of filing, information with the bank. Any money coming in and out has to be pre-approved. So yeah, I'm doing a lot of that stuff, but my main focus is obviously getting the right number on the right side. And unfortunately, this past year, it wasn't my best year. At that, we still beat the market or had the best number the majority of the time of the closing number. But, I was sidetracked a little bit with dealing with investors and the fund, just day-to-day operating procedures. So now we have, some people in place to kind of alleviate that, and I could, spend the majority of my time tracking the market, which is one of the things that one of my strong suits is getting the best number in the market and having the right side in the market. So yeah, I do that. And then, no, we're not doing a lot of tinkering with the computer program. That's set before the season starts, and we let it run its course through the season. So any tinkering during season is that's a big no-no because historically it's worked for us. So we make off-season adjustments, like I mentioned, and those are minor, but the main inputs stay the same, and those never change. So, and then also on a note, my investors, currently we have 32, both foreign and domestic. I would say I've met about almost half of my investors when they have come out to Vegas, or even the off season when they've come to Southern California. I've met them face to face, so I do a fair amount of those as well. So yeah, that's pretty much. Don't spend a lot of time visiting shows and stuff like that. I spend a lot of time, unfortunately, glued to the computer, watching the market and the moves.
Yeah, it's probably not as glamorous as some people would think or hope.
Right.
Yeah, so a couple more questions because I have a few more before I let you go, and I really do appreciate incredibly valuable time of yours chatting to me. So for all the casual players out there who are listening and who like to bet on sports and maybe don't want to invest a lot of their time, can you, and I understand if you don't want to get too deep just because of the IP involved, but maybe
Sure.
just one or two, or even just a small thing that they could do on a week-to-week basis when looking at which teams to pick and what some of the factors they should be looking for? Because obviously you hear, these days as people talk about yards per play differential and a few other things of the advanced statistics, but is there anything you could say to them that they should sort of keep in mind when having their $50 spread bet on the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, if you're making a $50 spread bet, I mean, it's majority of that. I mean, it's for entertainment. Let's be honest. So, I mean, yeah, get your entertainment value out of it. I guess. Stay away from parlays. Stay away from teasers. I'm not a big fan of either of those. Your odds are greatly diminished. One of the things that I stress and that I learned, studying finance is efficient market hypothesis. So whenever you're watching a show like at ESPN or you're reading your newspaper and they all have these trends, right? Where, this team has covered their last 4 games on grass, or this team has, won or covered 10 consecutive day games, or various trends like that. Remember, every key point of information is already baked into the line. So just because you read that in your local newspaper or you see it on TV, and then you run to your computer to make your bet, you don't have an advantage over the odds maker in those situations. You're just those numbers already reflect all relevant information. So yeah, don't think that you have an advantage because you read some information or you've seen something on TV. That stuff, you need to do your own research, and don't change your betting strategy or your model too much based on recent outcomes. So if you lose 2, say, I don't want to do it, let me switch to something. I mean, find something that makes sense and works, and stick with it and document it for a prolonged period of time, and see if it's something that's actually provides you with an edge. And yeah, don't take into account too much other people's opinions, because like I mentioned, efficient market hypothesis bakes into average yards per play. That stuff's already baked into those lines.
I appreciate the insight. One other thing I wanted to ask, and I'm curious about, what other outside resources are you looking into, if at all? Because people out there are always looking to consume or digest content. Do you rely on, Ken Pom or Phil Steele or any other publication subscriptions or even free content?
Oh man. So that's a funny thing. So Phil Steele, he blocked me on Twitter for me just requesting his actual win percentage. So he estimated, I think it was last year, that his win percentage was like, he is at 55%, when really he was at like 54.2. He rounds it up to 55. There's a big difference between 54 and 55. So yeah, a lot of these people that are providing content, there's some people that are good, and I think you interviewed one the other week. Who was it? Adam, I believe.
Yes, Adam.
Yeah. He does provide some good content. Like I mentioned, I have my own stuff, lined up, dialed in. But I do notice he puts a good amount of effort into his. So I mean, I could respect that, and it does. He mentions in-game betting, and he does provide some edges in that. So that's a solid advice for the casual players out there looking to consume content. But no, the majority of my content is purely stats. I'm purely using stats that are readily available to anyone of previous games for our simulation. And yeah, just historic. I mean, I can't give away too much for the IP, but yeah, just like I mentioned, refs. That's one I'll just throw out there. So refs with basketball, they have to have a certain sample size, but if over the course of 200 games, they've shown that the away team, has performed substantially better against the spread, that might be something to consider. So just information that you could readily gather from anything, from any ESPN or anything like that. That's beneficial. And then watching the market is something. I use Don Best is one that I use to monitor the market. So that's also key, and that's probably one of the main things that public information I use is monitoring the market. Sports Insights is another one that's fairly good at watching the market as well.
So last question, and it's completely off topic and probably irrelevant, but some of your favorite sports gambling movies of all time. There's not a plethora out there, but there are a few. Do you have any that stick out, and do you get involved in any of those?
You know what? Not so much. I mean, the one that comes to mind is Rounders. Is a favorite. It's not really sports betting. It's dealing with more poker.
Yeah,
but,
Matt Damon, right?
But I would say the key line in that for me that just resonates with me and just sticks out is he mentions what was it? He mentioned something about is it luck that the same 5 players are at the final table every year in the World Series of poker, or maybe they just have an advantage, right, over the field? And I would say that stuck with me because a lot of people, especially in the United States, gambling, it's a stigma. Well, is it, not a game of skill that I could, beat the closing line consistently and produce a profit at this over the long term? Maybe that needs to be looked at, because in the United States it's still a debate. Is it a gambling or is it a game of skill? And I would say, just to the point of that Matt Damon made in that movie, it must be a game of skill if I could have documented over 1,000 plays and hit over 55% winners. So, and not just me. There's a good amount of people that can as well. So I would say sports betting is definitely a game of skill, and should be legalized here in the United States hopefully soon.
Chris, before I let you go, where can people reach out to you if they want to follow your plays, see what you're up to, and get some insights from Vegas and from your business?
Yeah, definitely. So my investment fund, it's you can find me on contrarianinvestments.net. You can find me on Twitter at CCON8181. My fund, it's we take foreign investors. $10,000 is the investment minimum. Domestic, it's $5,000, and that's due to some regulatory constraints. All my plays are put out after the games start, not before they start. We don't want to erode our value, but after they start on Twitter, so you could kind of see. For those that do in-game betting, I know some of my followers, they'll bet my sides in-game. Very numerous publications have, picked up on what we're doing here. And like I said, we hope to expand overseas, within the next year or so. So look out for us and the various publications that will be documenting our move and our success coming up.
Chris, many thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it. All the best with the upcoming seasons, and I hope to follow and track your success as you grow. So thanks again, mate. Yeah,
and you as well, Jake. Like I mentioned, I've listened to a few of your other interviews, and you do a great job, and you do have some very compelling guests, so hopefully I could add to that.
Cheers, I appreciate it.
All right, thanks again, Jake.